Welcome back to Computers, Ethics, and Society. I'm Tom, and today we are talking about Johannes Himmelreich's Never Mind the Trolley, the Ethics of Autonomous Vehicles in Mundane Situations. So this paper is continuing our discussion of AI, and is particularly concerned with autonomous vehicles, right, self-driving cars, and it considers the relevance of a particular ethical dilemma to self-driving cars. And this ethical dilemma is kind of a famous thought experiment in ethics. It's called the trolley problem. This has been kind of popularized by the show The Good Place, but it's pretty well known in contemporary philosophy. It's originally posed in, I think, the 70s. And so the trolley problem is pretty simple. It's a situation where there's a trolley going down a track, and on that track, there are four individuals, right? And they can't see the trolley, they don't know it's coming. And if the trolley continues on that track, it's going to kill those four people, right? There's a switch track, and there's one person on that switch track, right? And the situation, the dilemma is that you are at the switch, and you can pull the switch and make the trolley go on the switch track and kill the one person, or you can let the trolley go and it will kill the four people, right? And so, the dilemma is one, to try to kind of tease out consequentialist or deontological leanings usually. And the idea is that the consequentialist answer is pretty straightforward, right? You pull the switch because it kills one person instead of four. It's for the greater good, right? You sacrifice one for the many. The deontological answer also seems pretty straightforward, right? You don't throw the switch, because if you did, you would be intentionally killing someone, right? Whereas if you don't throw the switch, four people might die, but it's not really your fault. That's the idea. Now, there are lots of different variations of this, and lots of different questions you can ask about it. But the idea is about distributing harms, and it's a situation that you're not supposed to wiggle out of. A lot of people want to really quickly say, oh, well, I would just yell at the people, or I'd run really fast and tell them to get off the tracks or something. You want to avoid the harms, but the idea is that you have to distribute the harms. Someone's going to die. You just have to figure out who, right? This is a famous situation, and it's kind of an abstract situation, and I think none of us will probably ever find ourselves at the switch track by a trolley where this is going to happen. But when it comes to autonomous vehicles, this seems like it might be a much more pressing issue, right? Because it seems like autonomous vehicles could really find themselves in a position to make this kind of choice, right? So in the article, they mentioned, imagine you're going and you're going to head into a tunnel, and there are some pedestrians, right? Two pedestrians walk out in front of you. The car has to choose whether it's going to swerve and possibly hit the side of the tunnel, possibly kill the passenger, right? Or go through and possibly kill the pedestrians, right? And so it has to distinguish and make the decision about how to distribute harms. It's going too fast to stop. Something bad's going to happen. The vehicle has to kind of, and if it's an autonomous vehicle, it has to make that decision itself, right? It has to somehow calculate something and figure out the way it's going to distribute harms. And so this kind of situation you might think is really pressing because, when we have autonomous vehicles, that means that the decision is outside of our hands. There's no one exactly to hold responsible, at least in the same way that we would hold a driver responsible. And so this seems like this might be something that we really want to sort out before we get a lot of autonomous vehicles on the road, right? Himmelreich's argument in this paper is fairly nuanced. Himmelreich thinks that this problem is not really that pressing for self-driving cars, and he goes through a process of kind of showing that why he doesn't think it's really that that big of an issue. Okay. And so let me just kind of review over his position, and then I will go through the 4 different objections he gives to why the trolley problem should not be central to our ethical considerations of autonomous vehicles. So he wants to get kind of clear about what a trolley case is. And this is already kind of implicit in the the thought experiment I gave, but he noticed 3 conditions that are necessary for a genuine trolley case, which is 1, the collision is unavoidable, right? So it means that someone's going to get hurt, right? And that's a for sure, right? The second one is that the agent has to be able to make a decision about how to distribute harms, right? So if, in the trolley case, if the trolley is just barreling down and you don't have an opportunity to throw the switch, then that's not really a trolley case. It's not really a moral dilemma. And then the third one is certainty and decision, right? So meaning whatever you do is going to have the impact you think it is, at least in this scenario, right? For a autonomous vehicle, it should know that if it swerves to the right, then the passengers are going to die or be severely injured, right? Or if it doesn't, then the pedestrians will be severely injured, right? Something like this. That there's not like they can just swerve and magically everyone's safe or something like this. So those conditions need to be in place for it to be a real trolley problem. And so, the author is gonna draw on these conditions, and to show that it's not really a pressing issue, he's going to focus on these 4 objections. And the first one is what he calls the consistency objection, right? And this has to do with those 3 conditions. And really what it is, it's not an absolute claim, but there is something of a tension or inconsistency with those 3 conditions when it comes to an autonomous vehicle, right? Meaning that it's almost never the case that these 3 conditions are really going to come together for a self-driving car, right? Pretty much because if the collision is unavoidable, usually there's not a lot of room to make a real decision about what to do, right? So think about speed is a big one. So if the car is going really, really fast, it's probably not going to have time to swerve out of the way in the appropriate situation. And if it's going, slower where it really has control, it usually has enough room to stop, right? And this is the way a vehicle would most likely approach a situation like that, right? It would slam on the brakes, swerve enough to kind of avoid everything, and diminish all over harms, right, to everyone, the potential damage. The way in which I think a lot of us would encounter a situation like that. And so, something like a going down the track and having to move one way or the other is very unlikely, it seems, for an autonomous vehicles, right? So these 3 conditions are not likely to come together, and the author outlines a couple of different ways to think about that in terms of speed and the potential for harm, right? And so so that's the first objection, right? This consistency objection, that given those 3 conditions, this is a very unlikely scenario, right? The second one is a little more technical. And here this has to do with, they call it the limitations of design objection. This has to do with the way AI and machine learning kind of operates. And usually when it comes to machine learning algorithms have what you might call a bottom-up kind of approach to learning. They kind of learn more like an animal or like a toddler, right? They develop habits about how to do things, and then kind of learn how to kind of go through the motions, right? So, with an autonomous vehicle, a vehicle would have all kinds of data about the way people drive in a particular area or whatever, right? How fast they go into a turn, how much they turn the wheel, how fast they approach a stop sign, how long they stop, how fast they accelerate, all the little things that you probably don't think of when you drive are the things that that cars kind of that algorithm is soaking up, right? And so it kind of establishes these habits and kind of just learns to drive the way other people drive, right? Now, when it comes to something like the trolley case, right? That's a really explicit, pointed kind of moral dilemma, right? Where you're kind of making a very kind of explicit, high level moral decision, right? Where you're really thinking about big picture and the implications of your decision, and factoring lots of things, and kind of taking for granted a lot of like the smaller, habitual factors there, right? And so to make something like the trolley case very central to the way we design the algorithms for something like an autonomous vehicle, would really change the design quite a bit, right, from an AI standpoint. And it would probably hinder a lot of the design models that we have. And so that's the objection here, is that kind of putting in this explicit reasoning in place, with maybe some decision about how the car should really distribute harms, could really kind of prove problematic, and it might even hinder like overall safety, right? In terms of, if the car is used to taking things slower, going a certain way, whatever. So so that's the second objection. The third one is moral and political issues, right? And so this claim is a little more straightforward. This one is that when it comes to the trolley problem, this is a pretty individualized moral problem, right? What an individual should do given a certain situation, right? And we're thinking about it in terms of lives lost and the individual lives lost, and distributing the harms. But, when it comes to the overall kind of safety procedures and the way in which autonomous vehicles should, you know, um, uh, behave on the road, so to speak, when lives are at on the table, right? Uh, you might think that that's more of a matter of like social policy, right? Not really something that you should take from the standpoint of a moral dilemma, right? It should be more general policy procedures about driver safety, the way in which we think about how someone should respond at a stoplight, or making a left turn, or merging, or all these other kinds of things where you have kind of general rules that apply to everyone, and they're just focused on overall public safety, right? That's more in the political realm, not in like Democrat Republican realm, but more just like social policy realm. And the authors suggest that this is really the approach we should have to safety concerns about autonomous vehicles. And the fourth claim is really just the evidential value, right? Even if you grant that autonomous vehicles will encounter something like a trolley problem from time to time, right? The likelihood is very minimal, right? And I mean, just reflect on your own driving experience. How often have you come across something like a trolley case where you really had control about how to distribute harms, but the collision was unavoidable? It's pretty rare, right? And to take something like the trolley case and make it really central to the way in which we design these vehicles seems like it might be putting way too much effort into something that's very, very unlikely to happen, right? So those are the main points, right? They're all kind of individual points. But just notice that they're somewhat subtle, right? And the author's thesis is subtle. He's not giving an answer to the trolley problem. Um, he's kind of talking about its relevance to the design of autonomous vehicles. So keep that in mind. I have some study questions here to think about, questions about how frequently, having an answer to the trolley problem would be useful, right? Whether or not you've really encountered some kind of trolley problem, these kinds of questions. So take a look at them and just kind of think about them a little bit. And that is it for now. I will be talking with you soon. All right.